my great pleasure to introduce you to you, Mr. Robert F. Kennedy, Jr.
Thank you, Dan. And I want to tell you how happy I am to be back here in Bellingham and to be back with the North Sound Baykeeper. I've been up here many times before. I want to thank the sponsors of this luncheon, and particularly my old friend Craig Cole, who's I've known for many years, come on my radio show and talked about the Walmartization of America. And it's been one of the people, I think, a real paradigm or example of what of the best thing of the best part of American business, about the commitment to community that is supposed to be part of our system of government and our democratic system. And I want to thank you for what you've done with the example that you've set, Craig, with your stores and with your advocacy. I want to thank Wendy and Robin and all the other people who are part of this organization. I'm going to just talk a couple of minutes about the biggest issue that's facing us environmentally, and then talk about water and the missions of the Keeper. But the big issue today, of course, that's facing us all, the major threat to our water supply is global warming. I did the president this week again said that he's interested in doing things about addressing global warming, but we can't move too quickly because it's going to injure the business or financial system of this country. I did 2 months ago, I did a piece for Vanity Fair magazine in which I addressed some of these issues. One of the things I talked about was that in November of this year, Lord David Putnam gave a speech before Parliament. And Parliament at the time was debating an issue, a cap-and-trade system that was designed to address global warming. And in England, everybody understands that global warming is real. They haven't been subjected to the kind of propaganda, the multi-billion-dollar propaganda campaign that people in this country have been subjected to. So there's still doubts in the media, et cetera, as a result of this, not as a result of science which is out there, as a result of a carbon industry-sponsored propaganda campaign that has infiltrated the public consciousness in this country. In England and Europe, people understand that this is a real threat and that that's what the science says. So everybody understands England, we've got to address global warming, but there's still vested interest and people throughout the society that say, we can't go too fast, we have to move incrementally, otherwise it's going to injure our financial system or our economy. And Lord David Putnam, addressing those concerns, reminded Parliament that exactly 200 years before, the same body had debated the abolition of the slave trade. And at that time, everybody in England believed that the slave trade was immoral, that it was a moral catastrophe for Great Britain, the British Empire, and that it had to be abolished. But there were people again who said we have to move slowly, we have to move incrementally, because at that, they pointed out that the slave trade represented 25% at that time of Britain's GNP. It was the primary source of energy for the entire British Empire, free human labor. And they said, if we abolish it overnight, our economy will be in ruins. After a year of debate, to its credit, Parliament did the right thing, made the moral choice, and abolished the slave trade outright. And instead of devastating, leaving the economy in ruins, the British economy exploded as tens of thousands of entrepreneurs rushed into that space to create new forms of energy, mainly mechanical ones, and that was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the greatest epic in wealth creation in the history of mankind. And the abolition of the slave trade, as it turns out, exposed these hidden inefficiencies in the system of free human bondage. And as it turned out, the slave trade had not just been a ball and chain on the slaves, it had been a ball and chain on the entire British economy. Well, we don't need to abolish carbon today to understand that it is the primary drag on American capitalism. We are borrowing $1 billion a day in this country mainly from people who don't like us, to buy our oil and import it, mainly from people who don't like us. And we're giving $1 trillion a year in subsidies to the oil industry and another $1 trillion a year to the coal industry. And those expenditures have beggared a nation that 20 or 30 years ago, when I was a boy, let's say 40 years ago, owned half the wealth on the face of the planet. And if you look at the nation that have abolished carbon and decarbonized their society in every example, they have immediately experienced extraordinary prosperity. Iceland in 1970 was the poorest country in Europe. It was 100% dependent on coal and oil, and Iceland was one of the first countries to directly witness the devastating, the catastrophic impacts of global warming, which impacts the northern climes disproportionately. And there were people in Iceland said, we've got to abolish coal and oil for moral reasons. There were people in Iceland who said, we have to move slowly, but Iceland went ahead and did it overnight. And today, Iceland is 100% energy independent. It's 90% of its electricity comes from geothermal, and it is the fourth richest country by GDP in the world. It is one of the largest exporters of energy today in the world. It can't run lines across the Atlantic Ocean, so instead it imports bauxite from Jamaica and uses its surplus energy to smelt it into aluminum, which it then sells around the world. And 20 years ago, corporations wouldn't dream of relocating to Iceland. But today they are lined up to get into Iceland to take advantage of its cheap, abundant, clean energy and the high quality of life that accompanies that. Sweden in 1996 decided to abolish carbon by 2020. And to get rid of nuclear energy, incidentally. It closed its two biggest nuclear power plants. It slapped $150 a ton tax on carbon. And again, entrepreneurs rushed into the space to create energy from geothermal, from solar, from tidal, from putrid garbage, sawmill waste. And today, Sweden is the sixth richest country by GDP in the world. Brazil abolished carbon a few years ago, and at that time it was one of the poorest countries in the south of the equator. Today, this is the first generation of Brazilians where every Brazilian child is going to be educated to high school because there's now a surplus of wealth from them abolishing imported carbon. Costa Rica, which is the most fuel-efficient economy in Central America, is also, as a direct result, by far the wealthiest. California, which is the most fuel-efficient economy in our country, Californians use half the energy that the average Americans. They use about 6,000 kilowatt hours per year compared to 15,000 to the average American, and it's by far the strongest economy in our country. So, and we have in our country far better geothermal resources than they have in Iceland. We have enough, according to the Scientific American 3 issues ago, we have enough harnessable solar energy, just in 19% of the most barren desert land in Arizona, to supply all of the electrical needs for our country, even if every American owned an electric car. We have enough wind. Our Midwest is the Saudi Arabia of wind. We have enough wind just in Montana and Texas and North Dakota to supply all of the electrical needs of our country.